It's time for the Double Stop with Brian Sword.
Welcome to the Double Stop Podcast. I'm Brian Sword. This week's guest is guitarist Joel Hoekstra. Now, Joel is an interesting guy. He seemed to come out of nowhere and was suddenly everywhere. Night Ranger, Rock of Ages on Broadway, Trans-Siberian Orchestra, a stint filling in for Mick Jones and Foreigner, all kinds of high-profile gigs. Now he's landed a spot in Whitesnake, left open by Doug Ulrich. Now, how does this happen? How does a guitar player appear out of nowhere in his 30s and nab all these gigs? This is the story of Joel Hoekstra, a man with an incredible work ethic and who's gone from turtles to snakes.
Well, I grew up in the southwest suburbs of Chicago, so I guess that's where I'm from. I currently reside in New York City, where I've been, I guess, for the last 14 years, and I came from a very musical family. My parents are both classical musicians, so they had me, going on cello and piano right out of the gate at an early age, and, all that stuff really helped, I think, give me a solid foundation to build on.
And how old would you have been at that point?
Man, I think I did cello as early as 3, and I was taking piano lessons, I think, starting at 7. I probably was not very proficient on either. I mean, it sounds impressive, but honestly, I wasn't really into the concept of playing music until I started rock guitar. That was really the first time I was really enthused about it. I think I did fine, but I had an older sister she was 2 years older than me, so she was just better at music than me, at piano and things like that. So to me, piano always felt like, like I couldn't keep up and like I wasn't very good, and so I didn't really want to do it, And then, rock guitar kind of, I guess at the age of 11, really changed that for me.
And what made you pick up the rock guitar?
Basically Angus Young. I was
yeah. Not the first.
I heard AC/DC, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. And, my parents never listened to rock around the house. I think a lot of, people my age, they've heard it growing up. And so it was part of their upbringing, and it really wasn't for me. My parents were always listening to nothing but classical, there was just nothing else on. So, it was really the first time I kind of realized, music can be really cool. I just had never really liked anything. I guess I did, but I didn't know it. I mean, I was always sort of singing along to my parents playing and, singing along to, I'd make up words to the little classical themes and the songs they'd be playing. My sister and I did that for fun all the time. And, joking around. So I guess in a way I did like it, but didn't really know it. And, but, definitely AC/DC and Angus Young was the inspiration for, starting to play rock guitar.
So you're 11 years old. You're classically trained to some degree at that point in a classical family. And then you decide you want to play rock guitar. What was the reaction amongst the family?
I think, they were cool about it, Yeah. I mean, I think it was just sort of they were happy that I was showing an interest in music, I think, at all.
Yeah.
So I think, that was cool to them. And I mean, I could see where they were coming from. I mean, I'm sure they did have hopes, I'm sure, that I would learn all styles and eventually, probably thought, well, when it comes down to really making a living, there's no way that rock guitar thing will work out, so he'll have to figure something else out with it, But, thankfully it's worked out so far, at least this far into my lifetime. So, but yeah, they were cool.
When you started playing guitar, did the earlier training, did that really help you out?
I think it did, because as soon as I got a guitar, electric guitar, I was able to kind of trail around one finger and figure out how to play all the Black Sabbath riffs and things like that I was into, Iron Man and whatnot, Electric Funeral. I remember figuring out how to play those riffs. All of, basically just all with one finger. I had never learned a power chord, but I was able to learn how all these Black Sabbath songs immediately just off of my ear being developed, from listening to music so much as a kid. So that was, I think, definitely helpful. And then my friend taught me how to form a power chord, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the most amazing thing in the world, So all those riffs, I was like, oh, that's how they're doing that. You just add the extra finger there. So, but it did help, man. And it definitely helped when it came time to learn, like I did go to, college for a couple of years of classical guitar eventually. So it really helped then to be able to understand the fundamentals of reading and counting and, all that stuff that had been with me since I was a very young kid and really had zero appreciation for it back then.
Yeah.
But then went, oh, okay, yeah, I get that, So, yeah, I mean, it definitely helps.
And what was your first band?
My first band was Outcry. I was, I think, probably 15.
That's a good name.
Yeah. It was one word, I believe, and yeah, we did probably I would say half originals and half covers. We were covering a lot of Dokken. I remember doing tons of that, and
nice.
And Striper. We were into I was always into the I hate the term hair metal. It's so lame, but I was into the bands from the 80s era that had some talent and could play, and I had zero image back then. I had short hair, I was just totally conservative, and so I was more into just figuring out. By then I'd figured out if anybody really had skill on the guitar, and that was who I liked, and that was that, so we were doing that, and we wrote our own stuff. That was, probably not the best stuff in the world looking back on it, but, it was a good experience. We wrote tunes, we'd go in the studio and record them, and we played shows,
oh, really?
I'd say, couple times a month, maybe something like that. About that every couple of weeks, we'd have a gig. 15.
How old were you at that point? 15. So you're 15 years old, writing originals and hitting the studio.
Yeah, they were bad though. I mean, it's that all again. It sounds impressive, but if you were to listen back to it, you go, "Oh yeah, you sound like you were 15, dude. You don't sound like you were,
It sounds impressive to me because it was mid 80s.
Yeah, no, well, man, that was the thing. Is back then that 80s scene was so good for pushing us all because, all these, Mike Varney was putting out guitar players who were, younger and younger, who were technically proficient,
Yeah.
So it really was pushing the envelope to be man, I got to get it together. I mean, I remember begging my mom to let me drop out of high school, so I could practice guitar more, and I remember the summer when I was 15, I did put in, I think it was 5-6 hours a day that I put in on guitar every day that summer, which for a kid is probably pretty good because most kids are just sort of fretting away their time or whatever. So I was pretty devoted to it, out of the gate. And, I was always just, I suppose, a bit more into just overall learning guitar than I was only doing the band thing though. I was, definitely very much into even then I was working on classical guitar a bit and trying to figure out how to play jazz and, just all kinds of things,
Were you self-taught at that point, or did you go back to lessons?
No, I had some great teachers out of the gate. My, the friend that showed me the power chord, I was like, well, where'd you learn that? It was the key to the universe, He said, oh, this dude, up at this store at the mall. And I went, oh, okay, cool, So I went and took lessons with that guy. And he was great because he taught me nothing but songs. So I think for the first probably year and a half that I played, I learned nothing but just rhythm guitar and songs that I liked. That was it. No scales, no exercises.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic way to start. The other thing that was really cool about the way he taught back then was he people weren't doing the tab thing back then yet. So he basically would teach me the song, as much of it that I could remember in the lesson. And then I had to go home and practice it. That was it. Like, there was no, like, it wasn't written down for me to go, oh, I'll practice that later. So I remember getting out of the lesson and being like, well, I got to go home and like practice for an hour so I don't forget what he just taught me, you know?
Did you get a good ear that way too, in terms of figuring it out yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was just good in terms of actually learning, like, in a way, the way rock guitar really is. I mean, if you're playing in a rock band, you know, you can't pull the music stand out on stage, you know. I mean, it happens here and there in a pinch. Guys will do it if, you know, hey, I've had, you know, a day to learn this set with this cover band or whatever. But in general, it's not cool, you know. You're expected to have stuff memorized. So it was great training for that. And it was also just great in that it made you practice, because otherwise it was a wasted lesson. You know, you'd be like, well, that was a waste. I forgot what he taught me, you know? So you had to practice it immediately. So I think that was actually a really good method.
So that carried you through until you said you went to some kind of music school after, like in terms of college?
Yeah. I mean, I you know, practiced really hard through high school, studying with a couple other teachers. Oh, after I took from him, I should definitely mention, very noteworthy, that same mall, there was a couple of us, me and my friend who knew the power chord. You know, we were getting good enough to that. I think, you know, we're starting to bring some stuff in for this guy to teach us that was, you know, a little more like solos, and that wasn't his forte. He was more into just teaching, you know, rhythm guitar. So they hired a guy from a local band who was kind of a hotshot guitar player, and that turned out to be T.J. Helmrich, who made a good name for himself in the, you know, the rock fusion scene with albums with Brett Garsett and whatnot that everybody should check out. And so
Cool.
He ended up being my second guitar teacher. So they hired him at the mall, and he was the guy to kind of teach me solos from songs, and also how soloing was sort of formed, like all the scales and the modes. And so that ended up being just an awesome, like, move that they hired him and that I was at this mall. And, you know, because I mean, he really is a great guitar player. You know, I'd put him up against anybody to date, you know. So it's still awesome that happened, and I was able to pick up a whole lot from him right out of the gate. I mean, I'd only been playing maybe 2 years. And so it was taken from him, I would say, probably from the age 13 to 15, something like that. And then there was another guy locally who had gone to GIT that sort of showed me the curriculum that they taught. And really from that age, I didn't study rock guitar anymore at 15 or 16. I studied classical, and I've taken some jazz lessons and things like that. But yeah, from that point, once I graduated high school, I did 2 years of community college studying classical guitar, and very little electric during that time. I just was really, you know, learning classical. And the band thing was kind of like slow, you know, I just wasn't doing as much of it. And then I went to GIT and played a lot of electric during that time. That was like 90, 91, I believe, for our Musicians Institute. For those that aren't familiar with it, or GIT is just their guitar division. And that was a great experience, you know. I got to basically just put everything else aside and do nothing but play guitar for 12 months, which was a great experience. And
did you get a good network out of that as well?
Yeah, definitely, man. I think, you know, I'm still in touch with the school, and, you know, proud to be an alumni, and some of the teachers I'm still, you know, friends with, and a couple of the guys from my class that play, you know, guitar I'm still in touch with. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say it necessarily formed any, like, quote unquote big break for me or anything like that. But, you know, it still was a great experience for me to get that amount of time to just dedicate to playing guitar. I would, yeah, I'd definitely recommend it for anybody. And they've since become an accredited school and everything like that, where you can actually get college credit there and whatnot. Back when I went, it was just simply like, do you want to go here as a trade school for a year? But it was a great experience, man, definitely.
So what kind of moves did you make when you finished at GIT?
Well, I'd gone from the Chicago suburbs out there, and so that was kind of my first like venturing away from home and all that stuff. And I guess I was probably 19, 20 years old. I worked, so it was like I better not go back home because I'll never become quote unquote famous or whatever it is everybody wants to do. So I spent a year working at Cherokee Studios, which is a recording studio that it had 5 studios in it, that TJ Helmerich was working at. So he got me in as a runner, and I quickly moved up into the tech department where he was working after, I think, a few months of, running around parking people's cars and answering phones and cleaning and stuff like that. It was like paying the bills while I was out there. Yeah. And it was a great experience looking back on it. That taught me a ton, just as much as working at MI. And also, again, I did, forge some contacts that kind of happened like after the fact. There's like people that I meet now where I say, man, do you realize you were in there recording when I worked at Cherokee and I was like, this young kid so that was, I guess, from 19 to 20 years old or something like that. And, I was just earning minimum wage. I didn't even have a car out there. I was like riding a bike around. And, that's right about the time those Rodney King riots happened. So it got a little hairy out there for me for the age I was at. I think, I was 20 years old and the city was, on fire. I got mugged like shortly thereafter, and just a series of things led me to go, you know what, maybe I'll go back to Chicago and like just teach lessons for a while and like take it easy. So that's kind of where another, change happened. And that was hard for me to do because it was sort of like, is this admitting that you're like not tough enough for your career to work out or whatever? And but I went back to Chicago and basically started playing in bar bands with my friends who are great musicians. There's a lot of good musicians back there in that area, and teaching lessons. And I did a lot of that. Like I basically for a long time had 60 to 70 students a week.
Oh, wow.
So I did that from age, I would say, 21 to probably 29, like my 20s. And the gigs, gradually got better back there. It is the only thing that really changed. I was always kind of teaching, and then I just started getting better gigs. I've kind of came out of my bar band into playing with a girl who did really well there locally, Kathy Richardson. And she sings with Jefferson Starship these days. And so she did her own material there in the Chicago area and did really well with it. And, you made good money in the whole thing. And I was also playing with Jim Peterick a bit there from Survivor. He had this thing called World Stage that he'd put on once a year where all these guys, come out and sing their hit songs, and you kind of, I was in the house band. And that turned out to be definitely like a big stepping stone for me, because that's where I met Kelly Kagi from Night Ranger initially. So right about the time of, I'd say I was doing that stuff from maybe age 27 to 29, playing with Jim and playing with Kathy and teaching. And, that was really my first kind of like, well, I'm doing really well locally. That's that's where I was at right about at that age. So,
and that's also throughout the 90s. That's through the 90s as well. And for somebody who was raised on, Varney albums, on Shrapnel and going to GIT, the scene had changed a little bit then too.
Yeah. Well, that's what was really good for me in a lot of ways. And even my experience when I came to New York City, which we'll get to just shortly after that. I mean, it was totally unhip to be, playing burning guitar solos. So it definitely, got me more into like, I better learn to sing background vocals. I better become a better parts player, somebody who can write the cool part or the cool hook, like, quickly, or, play some different instruments. There was definitely that thing happening as far as, playing with Jim or playing with Kathy. And then there was the other side of like still knowing TJ out in LA, where I guess it wouldn't really come from that in a way. I was also gigging in like an acid jazz band back there. I guess the point is that me not getting like stardom or fame, it's so cheesy, but like, not getting any of that out of the gate, it really helped me because, I had to do stuff like the swing revival became cool back there. I subbed on some gigs like that and learned how to play that, the swing style. And I was playing like, jazz duo background gigs, and I was playing weddings. And I mean, I did all kinds of stuff to, just bring in guitar income as far as a guitar player goes. And all that stuff is really good for me. And I would say, right in there, right at that age, another turning point kind of happened where I went to LA, and TJ and Brett were working with this drummer, Virgil Donati, and this bass player, Rick Fiorabracci. And they, I guess, they were rehearsing for a gig they were doing at MI. And they have, they've had an album out together, all of them or whatever. So, Virgil and Rick were like, hey, you sounded great. I jammed with him in rehearsals, and Brett couldn't make sound check, so I played his parts at sound check for them. And they were like, hey, if you ever have anything you want us to play on, and here I was, this local, Chicago musician out in LA with these guys who are, name players on the rock fusion scene. I was like, cool, absolutely. So I ended up making my first album with those guys, my solo album, Undefined, it's called, which basically I just took anything that I was kind of playing like at that time and just put down like, I guess it was 13 songs to a click, and sent them ideas of what I would want to have happen. And so some of that is what I was playing, what I had written with the acid jazz band, and some of it is just stuff I was demoing at home on back then my VS880. I mean, I was really like, we're talking the Stone Ages compared to now,
Yeah, sure.
But anyway, making that album was a real turning point for me, because that sort of, I guess, boosted me up from just kind of being like, a local guy teaching lessons and gigging to making this album with these great players. And then right at the same time, Kathy Richardson had gotten a gig playing Janis Joplin in this show, Love Janis, that was starting in Chicago. And so she did that there. I wasn't a part of it there, but when they went to go take it to the Hamptons in New York for a short run before it came to New York City, they needed a guitar player at the last minute, and she got me in there. So they basically flew me out there. I had a few days to get this whole show together and go on. And that was a big break. So right about that time, that album being made, Undefined, and me hopping into Love Janis, which was really my first kind of like regular get in front of an audience kind of experience, that was a big break for me. I think I was 29 at the time. So for me to, go out and do this show in the Hamptons, and, I don't even remember how big the theater was. Couldn't have been very big. But to get in front of an audience 8 shows a week and, play for a couple months was really a cool experience for me. And to have this album coming, and then the next big thing was when that show moved to New York.
And that background you had of playing all this different style of music and all this different types of gigs as you were just trying to make a living, that must have all come full circle when you started doing that kind of show to help you in that kind of environment.
It was a different thing. I mean, I think I didn't really have the maturity and a whole lot of the way I would have approached any of the gigs at this point. But that it's always that way. Hindsight is 20/20. I was definitely like, as a guitar player on Love Janis, still trying to just do my own thing a bit instead of just saying, well, like, let me just represent the way that Big Brother sound was, but still find a way to make it cool, which is what I would do now. I would find a way to make it good, but make it sound like them a lot more than I was, I think, the thing is to just go like, oh, well, that was back then, I'm just going to do, I'll just play it the way I want,
Right.
And, I probably could have done a better job with that. Hindsight's always 20/20 though, everything's a good learning experience. So, but it went well. There was no, we got to get rid of this guy,
Yeah. Is that just self-criticism? Is that just self-criticism looking back, or was there at all any kind of
looking? Yeah, definitely self-criticism. I cringe anytime I see or hear anything I've done in the past. Basically, I have a hard time thinking about anything I've done or said in my life. I just always think, oh my God, shut up. So
the show goes to New York, and what kind of rooms were you playing there?
Same play. I mean, they moved into a theater there in the Village. So that was, like a 500-seat theater or something like that. And that ended up running there for 2 years. So that was really like when life changed, definitely. And I was like 30 years old. So Undefined had just come out, and I was playing 8 shows a week and Love Janis. And, then, that's changed my personal life as well. I met my now wife. She was a stage manager on the show. And, so when the show closed after 2 years, I was like, well, I guess I'm not going back to Chicago, moved in with her. And, but it definitely put me in a, behind the 8 ball as far as all of a sudden feeling like I needed to start all over again in a new scene, being in New York, they, no matter who you are or what you've done prior to that, they want to make you, earn your way. And, so it was definitely just a matter of staying busy no matter what after the show closed after a couple of years. And that was, a whole lot of it was, I guess, working on The Moon Is Falling, which I dove into right after the show closed. And so that was definitely, like, I guess my most, like, elaborate album idea-wise and recording-wise, and was again with Virgil Donati and Rick Fiorabracci. And I also, gigging-wise, kind of like slipped into a totally new scene by, doing the Love Janis show of kind of gigging with oldies acts. I started to play with Big Brother and the Holding Company when they would play, and also the Turtles. Their guitar player was subbed for me at Love Janis. So I ended up kind of doing some gigs with them, which was a great experience, and that was really my first time kind of going around with like bands, flying to go play with bands and things like that, like up until then it had always pretty much been like local or this theater thing,
So that album, The Moon Is Falling, comes out. Was that self-released, or were you on a label for that?
Self-released, man. I've never put anything out on a record label to date, amazingly enough, outside of, playing on other people's stuff. But none of my stuff has ever been released on a label. So, I put that out, and that, I think definitely got me some, like critical acclaim in the guitar world, and, from well-known players and things like that would respond to me and know who I was a bit from having it out, and that was a good feeling. And I was able to, gig myself, around enough with the Turtles. Ended up being the thing that stuck quite a bit more. And Love Janis had started to go to regional places, like for, sit downs for a couple months. So I'd go do the show, and the Turtles would still fly me out of those cities to go play with them. And so everything's just kind of gradually grew, and from there, I did one of the world stage gigs still back in Chicago. Jim Peterick would still fly me back to do those. And one year I went in, and Kelly Kagi and his wife said Jeff Watson wasn't with them anymore. And so that was definitely a big turning point. And, me just saying to Kelly, man, you should have called me, man, and getting on him. And,
oh, nice.
And then, as it turns out, he listened to me because like about a week later or something, he called me and said Red Beach, who was doing the gig, sort of in like on an interim basis because he needed to go back to Whitesnake. He needed to miss a show. So he said, look, we can either like cancel this gig or like, you can come out and do it with us, but we're not going to be able to rehearse because we're, it's going to be just coming back from Japan. And, so it's sort of like learn these songs. And,
oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So, I had been doing that with the world stage thing, which is why I think Kelly was like, wow, well, this guy comes in and, he learns 30 songs and plays on no rehearsrsal with the band, So like I'm crazy enough to put in that much homework, So I think he thought, between that and the fact that I could copy, like the 8-finger technique and whatnot, and I think he thought, okay, this guy can probably do a pretty good job. So they gave me a go at that gig, and it was really sort of like, hi, nice to meet you, let's do a show type of thing,
Yeah.
And it went really well, and so that was another big turning point. So that was really like summer of 2007.
And were you a big Night Ranger fan as a kid?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like more a fan of the guitar playing and the guitar solos and things like that.
Sure.
I definitely knew their hits. But I didn't really know the deep cuts. I knew probably I'd say 7 or 8 of their songs. I don't know if I owned a Night Ranger out, but I knew probably 7 or 8 of their songs by ear, and definitely had worked on to learn the 8-finger technique, had worked on the Rockin' America solo at a very young age, probably 14 or 15 when I was taking lessons from TJ. So that was, obviously came in extremely handy.
I saw you guys play on the Monsters of Rock cruise, and on the first year, and there was a lot of interplay between you and Brad Gillis. So is that something that evolved over time, or did you have to kind of step in and try to do that kind of stuff on your very first gig with no rehearsal?
They were cool, I think, with the fact that maybe I didn't do a ton of it at first, and they were okay with that. Because I don't think Jeff was, he looked great up there, but he was not very animated and moving all over the place the whole time. And then I think, as I was getting my butt kicked in Japan by Brad, I think, like, I remember, like, I had gone to Japan with them right after I joined, like early 2008. And I remember like doing the Don't Tell Me You Love Me stuff and like looking up, and the whole arena was like looking at him. Like, oh man, I'm not going out like this. I was like, I got to start, cause I was looking down at my fingerboard and playing it like like a guitar player instead of a performer.
Sure.
So, that was a great, like, learning thing for me to, I don't know, it's terrible English, sorry, but it was a great motivating factor for me to go, all right, I got to get my stage presence together a bit more and start to, make sure I'm connecting with the audience at all times. And I think, me just being on stage so much during this last, period of career development, that's really helped with that a lot, But, Brad and I got along, so we were always kind of at ease. He was always kind of cool with, with anything I was doing and vice versa, So it was pretty easy to develop our stage rapport. It just took me getting it together more or less and finding a way to fit in with what they were doing,
See, I always thought it was Rock of Ages first, and that led to the Night Ranger gig, but it sounds like the Night Ranger gig happened first. Is that correct?
The Night Ranger gig happened first. I got, really the fill-in happened in summer of 2007, and early 2008 was Night Ranger for like full-time. Like January 2008 was when I was like really hired. And the Rock of Ages thing came about in really like late summer / fall of 2008 is when it began off Broadway.
Okay. So when you joined Night Ranger, it was for a touring cycle, right? At that point?
Yeah, I mean, they just kind of gave me the gig, and I think we've had varying degrees of how many shows we've done. I think that first year I was with them in 2008, we maybe did 50, and right about the same, and some of the other years. But 2011 was as much as I think we did 110 or something like that. So
that's a lot,
depending on the year. That was a lot. We were out with Journey and Foreigner that whole year. So, but yeah, Rock of Ages, that fall of 2008, and oddly enough, just coming off the philosophy of always trying to work and stay busy, I had been subbing for a friend of mine who lives nearby here to me in New York City doing pit stuff. He was like, hey, will you ever consider doing this? And now that you've heard basically every moment of my career, you'd realize well, shoot, I haven't really been reading music since, GIT or whatever. And I thought, I don't know if I can really do it. And he kind of talked me into it and said, no, man, it's cool. I mean, the way it works when you do the pit stuff is they do give you audio and they give you the book, and you can spend a few weeks working on it before you come in. So, that was a great experience for me. And I subbed on a few shows for him. I would just kind of learn whatever book they call it, whatever show he was on, whatever book he had. And I subbed for him on the show Tarzan that Phil Collins wrote the music for. And really, because of that, that's how I ended up falling into Rock of Ages. So it really wasn't even Night Ranger. The music supervisor for Rock of Ages, the guy who sort of recommended who to hire and get in place as a band. He was the keyboard player on that show. So he ended up, getting this music supervisor gig and going, who's a rock guitar player that can play theater in town? And then he kind of remembered me from being at Tarzan. And so that was my in there. And then he looked me up and saw, oh, wow, he's playing with Night Ranger. Cool. Their music is in the show. And,
yeah, that's true. That
so
helps.
that all just kind of came together in a very, strange way. I mean, I think most people would figure, oh, well, the guy from Night Ranger, the new guitar player in Night Ranger lived in New York and done this musical, so they called him. But it was kind of through doing that other stuff, oddly enough, through subbing on pit stuff that got my foot in the door there.
And obviously that show has gotten huge, but what was the rise of it?
It was very interesting because they don't give you a lot of time in theater because the budgets are usually very tight when they're trying to put a show up. So I think we rehearsed the band for the off-Broadway thing 2 days. And then we went into the theater and we had what's called tech, where you do one really or you go really slowly through the show so they can write the lighting cues and the sound cues. And they were rewriting the music while that was happening over a 2-day period. And so I was, freaking out. I was number one, when you watch Rock of Ages at a snail speed, I thought, this is the worst show ever. I didn't get that it was funny. So I was this is what am I doing? This is just awful. And I thought, oh, well, whatever. If it closes in a week, whatever, I, had some fun, I'll hang in there. And, also, it was just terrifying because they were rewriting the music up until we actually went on the first night and even after. So we actually had to start it with charts up there. We started playing Rock of Ages off Broadway with music stands, and it was so lame. I mean, it was oh, come on, man. We're playing 80s rock with music stands out there. It's just embarrassing, But I will say that after we did the first show, and you see it at full speed and you realize it's really funny and poking fun at itself, and the crowd went insane the first one. And I came
really?
home and my wife said, well, how'd it go? And I went, it's a hit show. And she was like, what? I thought you were saying it was the worst thing in the world, and I was like, well, I didn't really realize that it's really funny, and so anyway, I did know. And even after a couple of reps of it, I remember saying that to the director too. I just said, this is a hit show. This is people are just going crazy So regardless of like what critics think or, what I guess, certain, oh geez, what am I looking for? Like, if a diehard metal fan comes in and wants to poo-poo it because it's like, number one, I don't care because it's a gig where I get to play. But number two, you just see the general public reacts in a way to it that's like, this is going to be huge. Like, this is going to run for quite some time. So we ran off Broadway through the end of 2008, moved to Broadway in 2009, and are still there now, like 5-6 years later. So I think we've done, I've well over 2,000 shows at this point in time. With off Broadway, I think it's somewhere about 2,300 shows, of which I guess I've done probably, I guess, I don't know, 1,700 of or something like that.
And what's the crowd response now this many years in and you guys are so well honed? Are people still going nuts for it?
Yeah, people do. They still go crazy for it. People are seeing it for the first time, and there are people that come back over and over. I mean, there's people that I forget the guy who's just had an article written on him, a super fan that's seen it, hundreds of times and things like that. So
awesome.
We've got some real, diehards that come back over and over, and we've got just new people still coming in. And obviously with theater, they send out, different companies. Like, people will say to me, well, I saw it in Fort Lauderdale. How come you weren't there? I was like, well, it really wasn't the show. It was the tour in Fort Lauderdale. I'm a part of the Broadway company, right? There's also been an Australian company, a London company. Right now there's a UK tour. There's been, I think, 3 tours of the US of it. There's a cruise ship version of it. It's been franchised out through Asia. So I mean, it's all over the place. So people will say, well, how come you're not in it and, in this city, because that's the tour, but the blessing of, doing a Broadway gig is it's very unionized. So you can take off whenever you need to. And that was really the way I was able to sufficiently, maintain the Night Ranger gig and not have to say, hey, well, listen, guys, I'm just going to stay home and play this Broadway show. Cause I honestly don't think I would have done that. I probably would have just stayed with Night Ranger. But if this, having the ability to sub out at Rock of Ages allowed me to take off whenever I needed to go play with Night Ranger. And that's kind of the way things went for, the end of 2008 and all of 2009. And really, I guess if I think about it now, 2010, and then right in the summer is when I got the Trans-Siberian Orchestra gig. So that it was like sort of, the third gig coming into the equation that was like, is this going to be like, is this going to topple the whole thing?
Yeah, that's getting complicated now.
If I take this on. Yeah, it definitely got very complicated. Alex Skolnick was stepping away for a year to tour with his trio, and so a couple of friends in the band put my name in. It's like, you should check this guy out, and I auditioned and got the gig offered to me, and then I just went, oh man, like, how am I going to do this? Because this is like now I'm talking about going away for November and December and needing to actually sub out the Night Ranger gig, which I hadn't done yet. So Broadway, it's not a problem, but this was like, if I go do this, are the Night Ranger guys going to say, well, look, man, we got to get a new guitar player, So thankfully, that they were cool with it. And, we just found people to fill in November and December for, I guess it was 4 straight years, for 2010, 11, 12, and 13. So I was able to, throughout the year, basically do however many shows I had with Night Ranger. And every day, basically, I wasn't out with Night Ranger, play at Rock of Ages. And then in November and December, sort of set both aside and go do TSO.
Wow.
Or Trans-Siberian Orchestra. So
that's another big show, and it's touring too. So that's a bit of a combination of both. of what you've been doing
It's
before
a
then.
combination of both, and also like some of the classical background. So again, I was the right guy in many regards for the gig, and totally different, bigger shows than I had ever really played. I mean, Night Ranger in 2011, we played for huge crowds opening for Journey, but I had never really on a nightly basis, like you do with TSO, get out in front of 10,000 people and play. And you're doing 8 shows a week. And so that was a great experience for me in the production, and definitely have, the guys in the band are great guys. And, it's a great gig. They hire like top-notch crew guys, and, that was a great experience for me. Great learning tool once again. All these things, just kind of like I never really had my quote unquote one big break. It's just kind of all these series of breaks that kind of allowed me to. But I would say the synergy of being able to maintain those 3 for that 4-year period, and really even this year was a great thing, because it allowed me to play. I mean, if I included sessions and things like that, probably 375, 400 gigs a year for the last 4 or 5 years. So it's really helped me in terms of stage presence, in terms of knowing people, in terms of, monetarily, to make sure that I'm like, on solid footing and not kind of living paycheck to paycheck. But by no means am I like, a wealthy dude or whatever, but, it's, at this point, I'm not worried about it either. That's like,
Sure.
I don't have to go, how am I going to pay the rent this month?
Yeah. It still kind of blows my mind, though, when I think about that many gigs. It just makes my head spin a little bit. You're literally playing more on an average of more than once a day, every day for a year.
Yeah, because Rock of Ages is 8 a week, and
that's unreal.
TSO is 8 a week. And so, yeah, it's definitely been a lot, and in a way frustrating, because I'll go, how come I'm not further? How come more people don't know about me? How come, and, you're always kind of wanting to be, further than you are, but also in a way very gratifying, because it was like, well, I have all this stuff lined up. If one thing went away, then I don't really have to worry, and still make my living. I didn't have to worry like, well, if Brad Gillis, breaks a hand and Night Ranger can't gig for 3 months, am I out of work? I could just stay at Rock of Ages,
In terms of the recordings of the studio albums, what kind of experience was it for you to do those albums?
Oh, great, man. Especially the first one, because Somewhere in California was really, we had a nice groove going, like we needed to get Eric Levy in the fold for the top of that. But, with me, with Brad, Jack, and Kelly, we had a really nice groove going for, already at that point in time, 3 years. Because I think maybe, really 3 years, man, it had been. So, I felt like, hey, man, this is going to kick ass. Like, I was just kind of like, let's just do what we've been doing. And, I was always trying to, be like, let's make it sound like classic Night Ranger and give the fans what they want, and, everybody was on the same page with that, making that album. And we just kind of, wrote a bunch of like, very hooky choruses and, kind of just melodic hard rock. And I think it kicks ass, so I was definitely very happy to be a part of, making that album. And, then between we did the live acoustic album, which was, a great experience for me. And it really is like a lot of what Night Ranger was doing in those times. We would have a lot of acoustic gigs. And we got really, I think, pretty good at them, at pulling them off. And it showed a different dynamic to the band. So I'm glad we did make that album and DVD/DVD. And then, of course, the recent High Road album, I think, had even, I think, a little more challenging listen for most of the fans out of the gate. Like we, just weren't so focused on, let's make it sound like classic. It was just a little bit like, let's just do our thing and play what we feel like right now and not worry so much about it. And, I think definitely some great stuff though on High Road, and definitely an album I'm very proud of. I said to Brad when I joined Night Ranger, I was like, dude, let's just make sure that my era, the era that I'm in this band, I just want to have everybody look back and be like, that was a great era, And I think that those albums definitely, I think we achieved that. Between the gigs that we did and, those 3 albums, I think we definitely had a really nice run with me and that band.
And then you find out that Doug Ulrich has left Whitesnake.
Yeah, Doug and I were, we know each other, and we, usually just check in with each other once in a while and say hey. And oddly enough, I was texting with him, just saying, hey man, how you doing? He's doing Raiding the Rock Vault in Vegas, and how's that? And how's your son? And just like friendly stuff, checking in, quote unquote, networking or whatever, And Doug just said, well, there's some news coming, can't say what it is right now, but some news coming. And I just woke up the next day to seeing on Twitter, people kind of suggesting me as a potential replacement, and I was like I think I read, wouldn't Joel Hoekstra be great playing this set or whatever? And I went, well, what set is that? I clicked on it. I was like, oh, Doug left Whitesnake. Oh, So, I just thought, that's a darn good gig, man. I'm just going to shoot an email off and, see if, there's auditions or whatever, I've done that for a handful of things along the way. You hear, whatever, Richie Sambora isn't going to play with Bon Jovi. I did the same thing there and just sort of, put the feelers out there and see what's happening, and basically, yeah, I heard back eventually. I think it really was a combination of me doing that, which at first didn't really get a response. And then I think what happened is a couple of well-respected people kind of just put my name forward to David and said, you need to look into this guy. And then he went, oh, well, I think I have an email from him, like that kind of thing, And so anyway, David, I guess it was, I'm trying to think, maybe it was the end of May, I think. And I flew out and, basically it was more just to meet me. I think, David had watched me play a bunch on YouTube by then. And, but he did have me do some playing and a little bit of singing, and, we got along great, and that's always, the most important thing. And so, it went really well. And then he just said, well, why don't you come back out and, start playing on the album in early August. And so I kind of thought, okay, well, I've got this gig, but at the same time, I didn't want to, rush into saying to Night Ranger, well, I met David Coverdale for 2 hours. I'll see you later. I just kind of thought, let me go back out at the start of August and we'll see how this goes, the recording thing. And, that was when it really started to feel like, okay, this is happening, because I didn't want to go out there and start to record and a day later have one of us realizing it wasn't the right thing or something. But, the recording for the album went really, really well. And I think at that point it became a reality for me, okay, I'm going to be doing this gig, this is really happening. So at that point, just kind of put it forth to the Night Ranger guys and just said, look, I'm going to be taking this gig, and, we just need to figure out what's best for both of us on both sides moving forward,
Because there was a delay in the announcement for Whitesnake. They said, don't worry, we found somebody, but they have another gig and we have to, honor that.
Well, yeah, I think, that was my take on it too. It was look, I want to know, I'm not going to, put something out into the world and do this after, just one quick little meeting, and also, out of respect to what I was doing with Night Ranger, because, High Road was coming out at the top of June, and I thought, okay, well, we have an album coming out, this is really awkward timing, but, at the same time, you owe it to yourself to, look into things like this gig. And it was like, one side of me feels like, oh, well, this isn't the best thing to be doing at this time. But the other side of me is like, look, you owe it to yourself to like look into an opportunity if you're intrigued by it. And I certainly am intrigued, by the opportunity to play guitar in Whitesnake. So.
And what is it about Whitesnake that's so appealing?
Definitely, just like the David is rock royalty, I mean, working with him is fantastic. He's an unbelievably great dude. And, obviously a kick-ass musician all the way around. And, some of the people that have occupied the guitar position, leading in obviously is, really, really, impressive list of names, with, whatever.
Yeah, you're in good company there.
Yeah, definitely. Sykes and Steve Vai and Vivian and Adrian. Yeah, okay, sure. I'll take it.
Yeah.
Sign me up. So, that, and a lot of it just came down to like, I dig what we're doing on this album. It's kick-ass. Sure. I can't wait for people to hear it. And so a lot of it was that, and definitely there's a nice tour next year, and that's always helpful. It's that we're going to go out and play the world, upon the release of the album, and so that's an intriguing option for me. And definitely, I think it's going to earn me a lot of new fans, which I think is it's really important for me to continue to expand. And Night Ranger, while there's a very successful touring in terms of amount of dates and regularity, it's kind of just the United States, and Whitesnake is, does really, really well in Europe and South America and Asia. And so it gives me an opportunity to go to a lot of different places next year. And, and a lot of it is just a new challenge too, I mean, with Night Ranger, even, making the albums is fantastic, but we're basically going to be playing pretty close to, the same songs in a set moving forward. This forces me to, really challenge myself and, learn some new material. And, I believe I'll have a guitar solo in the show, and unaccompanied guitar solo, which is something I've never had. So all these things, I mean, it's a great gig, man. And, it's a great opportunity for me to, just continue to keep, stepping up as the way things have gone, It
sounds like this album was probably written when you joined then. Who did the writing on the music?
That's kind of like something I can't discuss, and I'm not at liberty to discuss at this point in time, but the songs are kick-ass, and they're definitely, it's rock and roll, man, it's just like straight ahead, like kick-ass, blues inspired rock that Whitesnake has been playing for years. So, we're not going to come out with a formula change on you or anything like that. So looking forward to it though, man. The album is great.
When you did your recording, were you in the studio with Reb at the same time working on your parts, or was it all done separately?
A little bit of each, because definitely at the beginning, and then Reb had to go do some gigs with Winger. And then, so that basically left me and David working on it. And then again, Reb came back. So a little bit each, I'd say about 50-50. And some of that towards the end there was really a lot of the two guitar stuff, which we had an opportunity to work on together, which is, definitely Reb's pretty awesome, man. And, it's cool because I think we have distinctive styles and we sound like ourselves against each other. There's definitely a difference there, but we share some common ground in terms of technique that I've never worked with a guitar player that's been able to cop as much of what I do as him. So we've got some really cool double stuff, harmony stuff on the album that I think people really dig.
So you've got Rock of Ages. In terms of today, you still got Rock of Ages. Are you heading back out with TSO?
I am. I'm as soon as we're off the phone, I'll be running the set, working on my TSO stuff. Rehearsals start October 27, and they kind of like you to hit the ground running there. There's a lot to cover with that. A lot of it is at production rehearsals there. So, you kind of have to know the music going in. So I'll be heading out with them basically in November, December, slightly into January this year. So yeah, I'm at Rock of Ages right now. Basically every day. We're doing some promo stuff for Whitesnake coming up next week. The photos, videos, and stuff like that. But yeah, from there, Rock of Ages up until I do TSO, and then Rock of Ages early next year until, the Whitesnake tour hits, which I'm really psyched about. So.
Brilliant. Well, best of luck to you. Try to get some rest in there.
Well, it happens, believe it or not. I just, I think during the course of a day, I just try to be productive anyway. So, I'm sure that people that follow me know I have always side projects going and things like that too that I'm always working on. So, I just think at this point in time, I've realized definitely that hard work is the key to success, So I just try to put in as much of it as possible to kind of keep, moving forward. So hopefully the next time you and I speak, I'll have, another interesting chapter on it all for you.
That was Joel Hoekstra, and we covered pretty much his entire career. As always, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes and SoundCloud, and please leave a comment. Find me on Twitter @TheDoubleStop and on Facebook at facebook.com/TheDoubleStop.